Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are staring into, well, kind of the abyss of human biology. We are looking at a mechanical failure that is arguably one of the most frightening yet strangely fascinating events the body can experience.
It really is. We're talking about a ticking clock scenario.
A ticking clock, but here's the kicker, and this is what really gets me. For the vast majority of people, this clock ticks in complete and total silence.
It is the absolute definition of a silent threat. And honestly, it's one of those topics where the more you understand the mechanics of it, and I mean literally the engineering, the physics of your own tissues, the more you realize just how resilient we are.
But also how fragile.
But also how incredibly fragile the system can be when one specific component starts to degrade.
We are talking about the body's main superhighway today, the aorta, and specifically what happens when the road doesn't just crack, but actually starts to balloon out. We are diving deep into abdominal aortic aneurysms, often just abbreviated as AAA or AAA.
Exactly. And, before we even really get into the weeds, I think we need to make a really crucial distinction because the language here matters a lot.
Okay.
A lot of people hear aorta and emergency, and they immediately recall the tragic death of the actor John Ritter. Or they think of those medical dramas where someone says, his aorta is tearing.
Right. That's an aortic dissection. I think I've been guilty of conflating them myself. Dissection is a tear inside the wall, correct? Like the layers are separating.
Precisely. Think of a dissection like cheap plywood getting wet. The layers, the laminations start to peel apart. Blood forces its way between the layers of the wall. It's horrific, but it's a tearing event.
A completely different failure mode.
Completely different. What we're talking about today, an aneurysm, is fundamentally a ballooning. It's a physical expansion of the entire vessel diameter.
Yeah.
All the layers are still stuck together, but they are stretching and stretching and stretching outward.
So if dissection is peeling plywood, an aneurysm is, what's a good analogy? A bubble in a tire.
That is the perfect analogy. It's exactly like a weak spot on a bicycle inner tube or the sidewall of a car tire. The pressure from the inside, in this case your blood pressure, pushes that weak spot out until it forms a bubble.
And just like a tire, if that bubble gets too big or the rubber gets too thin. And the stakes here are incredibly high. The source material we're working with today is pretty stark on this. It says this condition is usually asymptomatic until it's too late. And if it ruptures...
Well, I was looking at the mortality rates, and they are, frankly, terrifying. We're looking at, 85 to 90% mortality?
It is a catastrophic event. There's no other way to describe it. If that balloon pops, you are essentially opening the tap on the biggest high-pressure pipe in the human body directly into the abdominal cavity.
You're bleeding out internally.
You're bleeding out, and fast. It is an immediate, life-threatening crisis where minutes, literal minutes, determine survival. Which is why our mission today is so important. We aren't just here to scare people. We want to unpack the how and the why. We're going to look at the anatomy. What actually happens to the plumbing to make it fail?
We have to look at the profile. Who is walking around with this right now and doesn't know it?
Right. And we'll get into the high-stakes poker game of deciding when to operate, and we've got some really fascinating history to cover, involving arguably the smartest man who ever lived, Albert Einstein.
It's a fascinating case study. Einstein's story actually tells us a lot about the history of surgery itself and about, the ethics of treatment.
So let's start at the very beginning. Let's put on our hard hats and look at the infrastructure. We mentioned the superhighway. Describe the aorta for us, not just as a tube, but as a structure.
Okay, so the aorta is the largest blood vessel in the body. It's the trunk of the tree. It comes right out of the top of the heart from the left ventricle, arches over like a candy cane.
That's the aortic arch.
That's the arch, yeah. And then it runs straight down through the center of your chest. That's the thoracic aorta, and then into your abdomen. It's the main trunk from which every other artery branches off to feed your brain, your arms, your organs, everything.
And when we talk about an abdominal aortic aneurysm, we are talking specifically about the section that sits in the belly, right? After it passes the diaphragm.
Correct. So the aorta passes through the diaphragm, enters the abdomen, and eventually splits, usually around the level of your belly button, into the two iliac arteries that go to your legs. The AAA almost always happens in that abdominal section.
And what's the normal size we're talking about here?
A normal abdominal aorta in an adult male is roughly 2 centimeters in diameter.
Okay, so about the width of a nickel, maybe a quarter.
Bro.
Or our garden hose, I guess.
Yeah, maybe a heavy-duty garden hose is a good visual. Now, to be clinically classified as an aneurysm, the diameter usually has to be greater than 3 centimeters. Or the other rule of thumb is that it has to be more than 50% larger than the normal diameter for that person.
But I want to pause on the garden hose analogy you used, because a garden hose is just rubber and mesh, but human biology is rarely that simple. If I were to slice the aorta open and look at it under a microscope, what am I actually seeing? What is the architecture that holds all this pressure back?
That is the million-dollar question, because the failure isn't usually in the whole wall, it's in the architecture. You have three distinct layers. There's the tunica intima on the inside, which is just this super smooth, Teflon-like lining of endothelial cells, so blood flows without clotting.
The non-stick surface.
Exactly. Then on the very outside, you have the tunica adventitia, which is mostly tough connective tissue, collagen, kind of holding it to the spine and anchoring it in place. But the star of the show and the tragic hero of our story is the middle layer, the tunica media.
The tunica media, it sounds like the structural support beams.
That is exactly what it is. It's the thickest layer, and it's this incredible composite material. It's composed of smooth muscle cells and these alternating concentric layers of a protein called elastin.
Like a puff pastry, you said.
Yeah, or think of it like a laminated beam in construction. Layer of muscle, layer of elastin, layer of muscle, layer of elastin. In the aorta, these are called lamellar units. There are dozens of them.
And elastin implies it stretches, right? It's elastic.
It has to. And this is the part people forget. The aorta isn't a rigid lead pipe. It can't be. Every single time your heart beats, roughly 100,000 times a day, that vessel receives a high-pressure wave of blood, the systolic pulse. It has to expand to absorb that energy.
So it's a shock absorber. It damps the pulse.
It's a perfect shock absorber.
Wow.
It expands to take the hit, and then this is the critical part. As the heart relaxes, the elastin has to snap back. It recoils to its original size. And that recoil is purely mechanical. It's stored potential energy. And that snapback is what pushes the blood forward into your organs while the heart is resting and refilling.
So it's not a passive pipe at all. It's an active pulsating machine. It's a second heart, in a way.
In a way, yes. It's a hydraulic accumulator. And like any machine with moving parts that cycle 100,000 times a day for 70 years, it suffers from metal fatigue, or in this case, elastin fatigue.
The rubber bands get old.
The rubber bands get old. Over decades, those elastin fibers, they essentially get tired. They fracture. It's like an old elastic waistband in a pair of underwear. Eventually, it just stops snapping back. It just stays stretched.
But here is where I get stuck on the physics. You mentioned earlier that the aneurysm grows. If the wall is getting weaker, shouldn't it just burst immediately? Why does it balloon slowly? Why does it expand over years and not just pop one day?
This brings us to a fundamental principle of physics that governs all of vascular surgery. If you take nothing else away from today, remember this, the law of Laplace.
Okay, bring us back to high school physics. The law of Laplace.
Simply put, for a cylinder, like a blood vessel, wall tension is proportional to the pressure inside times the radius of the cylinder. The formula is T equals P times R.
Tension equals pressure times radius. Okay, let's unpack that. The P is just my blood pressure.
Right. Let's say your blood pressure stays the same, 120/80, pretty normal. But because your elastin is failing, the radius of the vessel gets slightly bigger. It stretches a little bit, goes from 2 centimeters to, say, 2.5.
Okay.
According to the formula, if the radius goes up, what happens to the tension on the wall?
If the radius goes up, the tension on the wall goes up.
Precisely. And this creates a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. It's a positive feedback loop from hell. The wall weakens from aging and smoking, so it stretches a little. Because it stretches, the radius gets bigger. Because the radius is bigger, the mechanical tension on the wall increases, even at the same blood pressure.
Which makes it stretch even more.
Which makes it stretch more. Which increases the radius again, which increases the tension again. It's a runaway train.
Oh, wow.
Once that dilation starts, the physics of the universe are conspiring to tear that vessel apart. The bigger it gets, the faster it tends to grow. A 6-centimeter aneurysm is under vastly more mechanical stress than a 3-centimeter one, even at the very same blood pressure.
That makes the silence of it even more disturbing. You have this physics experiment going haywire in your stomach, and you can't feel it.
You can't feel it because the aorta doesn't really have pain receptors for stretching in the same way your skin does. The pain usually only comes when it starts to get very large and impinge on something else, like the vertebrae in your spine, or when it actually starts to leak or rupture.
And rupture, as we said, means massive internal bleeding. The aorta is pumping the entire cardiac output about 5 liters a minute. If that wall gives way, you bleed out into your abdominal cavity very, very quickly.
It is a race against the clock that you almost never win.
Hence the high mortality.
hence the mortality. It is a condition where prevention and early detection aren't just nice-to-haves, they're literally the only things keeping you alive.
Okay, so if this is a silent killer driven by the law of Laplace, the immediate question I have, and I'm sure you listening have, is, am I the target? Who is the demographic sweet spot for this thing?
It's a great question, and the epidemiology is actually very, very specific. If you look at the data, this is a disease that disproportionately targets men.
By a wide margin, like a noticeable.
A very wide margin. It is 4 to 5 times more common in men than in women. And usually, we are looking at men over the age of 65. The prevalence in males over 65 is around 5%.
Hang on, 5%? 1 in 20. That is not a tiny number. That's surprisingly common. If I walk into a retirement home, statistically, a bunch of guys there have this right now.
Statistically, yes. 1 in 20 men over 65 are walking around with an undiagnosed AAA. And ethnicity plays a role, too. The data clearly shows higher rates in Caucasians.
Really?
Yeah. In the UK, for example, the rate in men over 65 is about 4.7%. If you compare that to Asian men, the rate plummets to 0.45%. And it's also less common in individuals of African or Hispanic heritage. So the highest risk group, purely demographically, is an older white male.
But demographics are just one piece of the puzzle. We have to talk about lifestyle. And there is one factor here that seems to dwarf everything else in the source material.
The smoking gun. Literally.
It's tobacco, isn't it? I swear every deep dive we do on vascular disease, it always seems to be tobacco.
It is overwhelmingly tobacco. The statistics here are just staggering. More than 90% of people who develop in AAA have smoked at some point in their lives.
Wait, can you say that again? 90%.
90. 90.
That's not just a correlation, that's practically a prerequisite. You almost have to have smoked to get this.
It is the strongest modifiable risk factor by an enormous margin.
Yeah.
If you compare smokers to non-smokers, the frequency ratio is 8 to 1. You are 8 times more likely to develop this if you smoke.
And does the risk go away if you quit?
It decreases, but slowly. The notes mention that the damage to the vessel wall lingers for years, even decades, after cessation. It's not like you quit today and tomorrow your aorta is safe.
Why? I mean, we all know smoking hurts the lungs, but why does inhaling smoke make the main pipe in your belly balloon? What's the connection?
It comes back to that inflammation we touched on. Smoking introduces thousands of toxins and oxidants into the bloodstream. These toxins circulate everywhere, and they irritate the lining of the aorta, that tunica intima.
Okay, so it causes irritation.
Right, and that irritation is an injury. So the body's immune system does what it's supposed to do. It sends in inflammatory cells, like macrophages and lymphocytes, to the site of the injury to clean things up.
The body tries to fight the toxins?
Exactly. But in doing so, these immune cells, in their attempt to heal, release a whole cocktail of destructive enzymes. Specifically, things like matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs.
That's a mouthful. What do they do?
Think of them as molecular scissors. Their normal job is to trim and remodel tissue, break down old collagen and elastin so new stuff can be built.
Yeah.
But in a smoker's aorta, they go rogue, they get overactivated, they just start chewing up the elastin fibers in the tunica media.
So smoking literally unleashes little Pac-Men that eat the structural integrity of your main artery.
That is a terrifyingly accurate way to picture it. And it's not just MMPs. The notes also mention something called granzyme B, another enzyme that disrupts how collagen is organized. So you're attacking both the elastin and the collagen, the two main structural proteins.
You're just dissolving the rebar in the concrete.
That's it. And that brings us to the other really big factor, which you can't control. Genetics.
I saw this in the notes, and it actually made me sit up straight. The familial prevalence. The brother factor.
Yes. This is crucial for anyone listening. If you are a man and your brother has an abdominal aortic aneurysm, your risk is 4 to 6 times higher than the general population.
4 to 6 times.
But get this. The absolute risk for male siblings of patients is somewhere between 20 and 30%.
That is huge. 20 to 30%. That's not a risk. That's a coin toss every time a brother gets diagnosed.
It suggests a very strong genetic link. We see it associated with specific, known connective tissue disorders, rare conditions like Marfan syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. These are conditions that affect how your body builds collagen and other connective tissues, the glue that holds your cells together. If your glue is weak, your aorta is weak.
But most people within AAA don't have Marfan syndrome, right?
Correct. So for most people, it's a more subtle genetic predisposition. And there's a mystery here regarding that male predominance we talked about.
Yeah, why men so much more than women?
Well, one of the hypotheses mentioned in the sources is the idea of X-linked mutations. The genes for some of these crucial structural proteins might be on the X chromosome.
Okay. Walk me through that.
So women are XX, men are XY. If the mutation that weakens the aorta is on the X chromosome, a woman has a backup X. She has another copy of that gene that is probably normal, which can compensate. She has a spare tire, genetically speaking.
Well, Ben.
Men don't. We only have one X chromosome. If our X chromosome has the weak aorta gene, well, that's the one we've got. We get the weak aorta. It's a compelling theory for why heterozygous females, women with one bad copy, are less affected.
Biology is wild. So we have the profile. Older white male, smoker, maybe a brother with a condition. We know the mechanics. Law of Laplace, elastin failure. So how do we find this thing if it's so silent?
That is the challenge. Because it is asymptomatic, most AAAs are found incidentally. You go to the doctor for something else entirely. Maybe you have gallstones or kidney issues or back pain, and they order a scan of your abdomen for that.
And the radiologist just spots it.
Yeah, the radiologist is looking at your kidney and says, whoa, hold on a second, look at the aorta.
Can a doctor feel it, like with their hands during a routine physical?
Sometimes. If the aneurysm is large enough, say over 5 centimeters, and the patient isn't too overweight, a doctor can feel what we call a pulsatile abdominal mass by pushing deep into the stomach just above the belly button.
What does that feel like?
It feels like a rhythmic throbbing that is wider than it should be. You can almost feel the two sides of the tube expanding with each heartbeat. But relying on that is not a great strategy. It misses a lot of them, especially in a population that might carry a bit more weight around the middle.
So we need imaging. That's the only reliable way.
We need imaging. And the absolute gold standard for screening is an abdominal ultrasound.
The same thing they use for babies.
Exactly the same technology. It's non-invasive, there's no radiation, it's quick, and it's relatively cheap. The technician can put the probe on your belly and get the diameter right away. The only downside is that sometimes bowel gas or obesity can obscure the view.
But if they see something, they usually move to the heavy hitters, right?
Right. If the ultrasound confirms an aneurysm, then you'll likely get a CT scan. A CT scan gives you a beautiful three-dimensional roadmap of the aorta. It has nearly 100% sensitivity.
And that's for planning the surgery.
It's for planning the repair. It shows the calcification in the wall, the exact shape of the aneurysm, and most importantly, its relationship to the arteries that go to the kidneys. You have to know exactly where those are before you operate.
Okay, so we have the tools. Ultrasound is cheap and effective. This leads me to a topic that, frankly, I find a little annoying. The screening guidelines.
Yes, the great debate.
If this kills so many people, and it's silent, and the test is easy, why on earth aren't we screening everyone? I was looking at the U.S. guidelines versus the rest of the world, and it feels incomplete.
It is a subject of massive contention in the medical community. Let's look at the U.S. approach first. The USPSTF, that's the United States Preventive Services Task Force, recommends a one-time screening ultrasound for men aged 65 to 75.
Okay, so far so good.
But only if they have a history of smoking.
Only if they smoked. So if you're a 68-year-old man who never smoked, but your brother had a AAA rupture and died, the guideline says no scan for you.
Essentially, yes. Or at least your insurance might not automatically pay for it as a screening test. A doctor would have to justify it based on that family history.
That feels negligent. I mean, sorry, you didn't smoke, so we won't look for the potential bomb in your abdomen.
Negligent is a strong word, but I absolutely understand the frustration. It comes down to the brutal math of public health economics. It's a concept called NNT, or number needed to treat.
Explain that.
Or in this case, number needed to screen. They calculate how many healthy people they have to inconvenience and scan to find one aneurysm that is dangerous enough to actually require fixing.
And for non-smokers, that number is too high.
In their calculation, yes. In non-smokers, the prevalence is so low, less than 1%, that you might have to scan 500 or even 1,000 men to find one significant aneurysm. From a public health policy standpoint, they argue that the resources spent scanning those 1,000 healthy men, the millions of dollars, could be better spent on, say, diabetes or heart disease where the impact is broader. It's cold calculus.
But for that one guy out of the 1,000, it's 100% of his life.
It is. Absolutely. But that's the population level view versus the individual view.
So contrast that with the UK then. What do?
They take a much broader approach. In the UK and in Sweden, the recommendation is to screen all men when they turn 65, regardless of their smoking history.
Everyone gets the test.
You turn 65, you get a letter in the mail inviting you for your scan. It's an opt-out system, not an opt-in.
And Does that broader net catch more fish? Is it saving lives?
The data suggests it absolutely does. The source material highlights Sweden, which has one of the best programs. They reported that their nationwide screening program decreased the risk of death specifically from AAA by 42%.
42%. That is a massive reduction in mortality for a simple, cheap ultrasound test. It feels like the U.S. is gambling, just betting on that smoking variable being the only one that really matters.
It is a heavy bet. And as we discussed with the genetic factors, it leaves the brothers of aneurysm patients potentially out in the cold if they aren't proactive in advocating for themselves.
Okay, so let's say you get the scan. You beat the system, you ask your doctor, you get the ultrasound, and they find something. You're a 68-year-old guy, they see a bulge that's, say, 4 centimeters. Do they rush you into surgery?
No, not usually. This introduces the concept of watchful waiting, or, more accurately, active surveillance. The next step depends entirely on size.
It's all about the diameter.
It's all about the diameter. If it's less than 3 centimeters, you're basically considered normal, or maybe ectatic, which is a fancy word for slightly dilated. If it's between 3.0 and 5.5 centimeters, you enter the surveillance zone.
And what does that mean practically?
It means you come back for repeat ultrasounds. If it's on the smaller side, maybe every couple of years. As it gets bigger, you come back every year, or even every 6 months. You are watching the balloon to see how fast it's inflating.
That has to be psychologically tough. I mean, walking around knowing you have a hand grenade in your belly, but the doctor says, don't worry, it's not big enough to go off yet.
It is extremely tough. A lot of patients experience significant anxiety. But the reason we do it is that the surgery itself carries risk. It's not a minor procedure. You don't want to expose someone to the risk of a major operation if the risk of the aneurysm bursting is, for all practical purposes, close to zero.
So where is that line? When does the risk of bursting outweigh the risk of the surgery?
That brings us to the tipping point. And the magic number, generally speaking, for men is 5.5 centimeters.
5.5. Why that specific number?
It's based on decades of observational studies and clinical trials. When an aneurysm is under 5.5 centimeters, the annual risk of rupture is less than 1%. It's very, very low. But once you cross that 5.5 centimeter threshold, the law of Laplace really takes over.
The curve shoots up.
It skyrockets. The data shows that between 5.5 and 7 centimeters, the rupture risk jumps to about 10% per year. If it gets over 7 centimeters, the risk is around 33%. That's a 1 in 3 chance of death every single year you wait.
Okay, at that point, the surgery seems like a pretty good bet.
At that point, the risk of elective surgery, which is maybe 4 or 5% mortality, is much, much lower than the risk of doing nothing. The other trigger for surgery is rapid growth. If it grows more than 1 centimeter in a single year, that's a sign that the wall is unstable and it's time to fix it, regardless of the absolute size.
Now, I want to challenge this ruler-based medicine for a second. Is diameter really the perfect predictor? I mean, structures fail because of stress, not just size. Do small aneurysms ever burst?
This is the biomechanics debate, and it is absolutely where the cutting edge of the field is moving. And the answer is yes, small ones do burst. In fact, reports show that 10 to 24% of ruptured AAAs were actually less than 5 centimeters when they ruptured.
That's terrifying. So that a so-called safety zone isn't perfectly safe.
No. And conversely, autopsy studies find that many people die of old age with huge 7 or 8 centimeter aneurysms that never ever ruptured. So diameter is a blunt instrument. It's a good statistical proxy for risk across a population, but it's not the true physics of risk for an individual.
So what is the physics of risk? How do we get better than a ruler?
The new science is focusing on something called peak wall stress, or PWS. Think about it like an engineer analyzing a bridge. A bridge doesn't collapse just because it's big. It collapses when the stress on a specific beam exceeds the strength of that beam's material.
Right. It's about stress versus strength.
Exactly. An aneurysm ruptures when the mechanical stress on the wall caused by blood pressure and flow exceeds the wall's strength. This might happen at 4 centimeters if the wall is paper thin and heavily calcified in one spot, or it might not happen at 8 centimeters if the wall is thick and reinforced with scar tissue.
So how on earth do we measure that stress inside a living person?
We use computational modeling, specifically a technique called finite element analysis, or FEM. It's the same computer modeling that engineers use to design airplanes and skyscrapers.
You're kidding.
Not at all. They take the patient's CT scan, create a high-fidelity digital 3D model of that person's unique aneurysm, and then run a simulation. They simulate the patient's blood pressure flowing through it to see where the hot spots of stress are on the wall.
That is fascinating. So we are moving from using a simple ruler to using a supercomputer to create a digital twin of the patient's aorta to predict failure.
That's the future. Personalized biomechanics. But for now, in standard clinical practice across the country, the 5.5 centimeter rule is still the law of the land for most surgeons.
Okay, so let's say you hit 5.5, or the computer says, danger. It's time to fix it. Is there any way to avoid the knife? Can we just take a pill?
We'd love to. That is the holy grail of research. But currently the answer is no. There's no medical therapy, no pill that has been proven to shrink an aneurysm or even reliably stop its growth.
So things like blood pressure medication don't help.
Oh, they help. We aggressively manage the risk factors. We tell patients to stop smoking, that's number one. We put them on statins to manage cholesterol and reduce inflammation. We control their blood pressure to lower the P in the law of Laplace. But none of those things fix the fundamental hole in the tire. They just lower the pressure inside it.
So it's surgery. And we have two main flavors here, as I understand it. Option A and option B. Let's start with option A, the classic open repair.
Option A is the classic. It hasn't changed much in principle for decades, and it is major, major surgery. They make a large incision in the abdomen, literally opening you up from your breastbone down to your pubic bone.
Visceral.
Extremely. They have to move the intestines out of the way to get to the back of the abdomen where the aorta lies. Then they have to clamp the aorta above the aneurysm and the iliac arteries below it to completely stop the blood flow.
Which means cutting off all blood to your legs and pelvic organs.
For a short time, yes. Maybe 30 to 60 minutes. Then they physically cut out the diseased, ballooned section of the aorta. They discard it. And they sew in a synthetic grafted tube made of a fabric like Dacron or Gore-Tex.
Like a plumber replacing a bad section of pipe.
It is exactly that. They sew it in place with permanent suture, they unclamp, check for leaks, put your intestines back, and close you up.
It sounds barbaric, but also really solid, a definitive fix.
It is extremely durable. That's the big pro. Once that graft is sewn in, it almost never fails. It's a physical plumbing replacement that will last the rest of your life. But the cost is trauma. It's a huge physiological hit to the body.
What's the recovery like?
A week or more in the hospital, a long stay in the ICU, significant pain, and a recovery that takes months. And even for a planned elective surgery, the mortality rate is around 4 to 6%.
That's not negligible at all. So naturally, everyone must want option B, the high-tech, minimally invasive version, EVI.
EVI, endovascular aneurysm repair. This started in the 1990s, and it absolutely revolutionized the field.
So how does it work? No big incision.
No big incision. Instead of cutting open the belly, the surgeon makes 2 small cuts in the groin to get access to the femoral arteries. They thread catheters up through your own arteries all the way into the aorta. Inside these catheters is a collapsed stent graft.
Like a ship in a bottle.
That is the perfect description. They position this collapsed device inside the aneurysm using X-ray guidance. Then, when it's in the perfect spot, they pull a trigger on the handle and the stent springs open. It has metal struts, like a skeleton, that expand and bite into the healthy aortic wall above and below the aneurysm.
So it basically relines the pipe from the inside.
Exactly. It creates a new sealed channel for the blood to flow through. The blood flows through the stent, and the pressure is taken off the weak, ballooned aneurysm wall. The aneurysm is excluded from circulation.
And then what happens to the old balloon part?
With the pressure gone, it usually thromboses clots off, and over months and years, it tends to shrink down around the new stent.
That sounds infinitely better for the patient. You go home the next day.
Often, yes. The mortality risk during the procedure is much lower, maybe 1 to 2%. The hospital stay is a couple of days. You're back on your feet in a week or two. It's the preferred method for older, frailer patients who might not survive the trauma of an open surgery.
But I feel a but coming. There's always a catch with something that sounds this good.
The catch is the seal. In open surgery, you physically sew the new pipe in. In EVIOR, you are relying on friction and the outward force of the stent to create a seal against the aortic wall. And because of that, it can fail over time. We call these failures endoleaks.
Endoleaks? That doesn't sound good at all.
It's the Achilles heel of EVR. And this is where we get a bit technical for a second, because there isn't just one type of leak. The source material mentions there are 5 main types.
5 types of leaks. Give us the greatest hits. What keeps a vascular surgeon up at night?
The scariest one by far is a type I endoleak. This is where the seal at the very top or the very bottom of the stent fails. Blood starts leaking from the aorta or on the outside of the stent and back into the aneurysm sac.
So the surgery effectively failed. The balloon is under high pressure again.
Exactly. It completely defeats the purpose of the operation. If you have a type I leak, you are at immediate risk of rupture again. You need to go back in and fix it right away, usually by putting in another stent piece to extend the seal.
Okay, so that's the worst one. What's the most common?
The most common and the most annoying is a type 2 endo leak. This is where the main stent is sealing the front door perfectly, but the plumbing in the abdomen is a complex web. Small arteries that branch off the aorta, like the lumbar arteries that go to your back, can actually backfeed blood into the aneurysm sac.
Wait, the blood goes in the back door.
The blood comes in the back door. The stent is sealing the main highway, but blood from these little side streets flows backwards into the aneurysm. Often type 2 endoleaks are low pressure and benign, but sometimes they can keep the aneurysm pressurized and even make it grow.
So what does all this mean for the patient long term?
It means if you get an EVAR, you are married to your vascular surgeon for life. You need surveillance with CT scans every year, forever, to check for these leaks. It requires maintenance.
So open repair is one and done, but high trauma. EVAR is low trauma, but high maintenance.
Perfectly put. It's a trade-off. Do you pay the cost up front with pain and a long recovery? Or do you pay it over installments with lifelong surveillance and the potential for repeat procedures down the road?
Now, we've been talking this whole time about the controlled scenario, planned surgery, but we have to talk about the scenario where things go wrong. Rupture.
A catastrophe.
What does a rupture actually look like? If someone is listening, what are the red flag signs?
We teach medical students the classic triad. 1. Severe, sudden pain, usually in the back or abdomen, often described as a tearing sensation. 2. Hypotension, which is shock. The patient gets clammy, their blood pressure plummets, they might faint. And 3, a pulsatile mass.
But I imagine in the chaos of a real-life emergency, it's not always that clear-cut.
It rarely is. The absolute tragedy of a rupture is misdiagnosis. The pain in the back can be excruciating, and it is very, very often mistaken for kidney stones or severe musculoskeletal back pain.
That's heartbreaking. You show up at the ER thinking you have a kidney stone, but you're actually bleeding to death internally.
And time is everything. There's a specific physical sign that is ominous. It's called Gray-Turner sign, which is deep bruising that appears on the flanks, the sides of the body, between the ribs and the hip. That's a visual sign of blood tracking through the tissues from a retroperitoneal bleed. If you see that, it's a desperate situation.
Let's look at the grim statistics again. We said 85 to 90% mortality overall. Can you break that funnel down for us?
Yeah, it's a funnel of attrition. Of everyone who ruptures in AAA, 65 to 75% die before they even reach the hospital. They die at home or in the ambulance on the way.
Wow. 2/3 are gone before they even get through the door?
Of those who make it to the hospital alive, the source says up to 90% die before they even reach the operating room. Their blood pressure crashes in the emergency department, and the team can't stabilize them enough to even get them to surgery.
And if they actually make it to the operating table, the lucky few?
Even then, the surgery is a desperate Hail Mary procedure. The post-op mortality is still greater than 40%. It is just a devastating event from start to finish. It underlines why screening and elective repair, fixing it when the risk is 4%, is so important. You do not want to be in the rupture category.
This feels heavy. So let's shift gears slightly and look at the human history of this. Because while the biology of the failure hasn't changed, our ability to deal with it certainly has.
It has. The history is actually quite colorful and really shows how far medicine has come.
The sources say it goes all the way back to ancient Rome, right?
Yes, 2nd century AD. A Greek surgeon practicing in Rome named Antyllus described trying to treat these. His technique was to tie off the artery above and below the aneurysm and then cut it open to remove the clot inside. Did it work? I mean, that sounds ambitious. It almost certainly did not. Without anesthesia, without sterile technique, without blood transfusions, opening the abdomen and trying to tie off the aorta was a guaranteed death sentence from shock or infection. For almost 2,000 years after that, there was essentially nothing effective doctors could do. Until the 1920s, Rudolf Matus in 1923 performed the first successful ligation. But the really famous story, the one that connects pop culture and science, is Albert Einstein.
I love this story. So Einstein, the man who described the curvature of space-time, had a curvature problem in his own aorta.
He did. He was diagnosed with a AAA in 1948. And at that time, those synthetic Dacron grafts we talked about, they didn't exist yet. So his surgeon, a man named Rudolf Nissen, did something that sounds completely bizarre today. He wrapped the aneurysm in cellophane.
Cellophane, you mean like sandwich wrap.
Polyethylene cellophane, the exact stuff you'd use in the kitchen.
What on earth was the logic there? Let's just tape it up and hope for the best.
The idea wasn't purely mechanical support. The idea was that the cellophane was a foreign body, an irritant to the tissue. It would cause a sterile inflammation, which would lead to fibrosis scar tissue formation. The hope was that a thick, tough shell of scar tissue would form around the aorta and physically stop it from expanding further, like a cast made of the body's own scar tissue.
That is incredibly inventive. Did it work?
It bought him time. He lived for another 6 years with his cellophane wrap around his aorta, but in 1955, the aneurysm finally ruptured.
And this leads to that famous, incredible quote.
Yes, he was in the hospital and he was offered surgery again. Techniques had advanced slightly by 55, but he refused.
Okay.
And he said, I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I've done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly.
I will do it elegantly. That is so. Einstein. Even in facing death, he had this incredible perspective on life and its natural course.
He died 5 days later. It's a powerful reminder of patient autonomy, even in the face of a fatal condition. Just because we can fix something doesn't always mean the patient wants us to.
There are other famous names too, right? Lucille Ball.
Yes, the star of I Love Lucy. She actually died from a ruptured aneurysm just a week after undergoing a major open heart surgery for something else. And she was a heavy smoker for decades, which fits the profile perfectly.
And Conway Twitty, George C. Scott, even the creator of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax.
It's a condition that has cut short a lot of creative lives. And in almost every one of those cases, smoking was a major factor.
So looking forward, we know the history. We know the current state of cut it out or stent it. What is the future? How do we stop this without surgery?
That is the holy grail, true medical management. If we can understand those molecular scissors, the MMPs and other enzymes, maybe we can find a way to disarm them. The research frontiers here are really exciting. A lot of it is happening in animal models, specifically mice, to understand the genetics.
What are they finding in these mice models?
Well, there's a really interesting study mentioned involving a protein called cyclophilin A. Researchers found that if they created a mouse that was genetically engineered to not have the gene for cyclophilin A, it provided complete protection against AAA. The heist just didn't get them, even when they tried to induce them.
So that's a potential drug target, a cyclophilin A blocker.
Exactly, or granzyme B, that other enzyme we mentioned that eats collagen. If you eliminate that enzyme in mice, it dramatically slows the progression of the aneurysm. The dream is that one day we diagnose a small 3-centimeter aneurysm, and instead of just watching and waiting while the law of Laplace does its dirty work, we give you a pill to freeze the process in its tracks.
That would be a complete game changer. It would turn this into a chronic, manageable condition like high blood pressure.
It would be huge. And then there's the tech side. We talked about FEM, the stress analysis.
The digital twin idea.
Right. But taking it even further, people are developing machine learning tools that can analyze a CT scan, not just measure the diameter, but look at the texture of the clot, the shape, the wall thickness, and predict its growth and rupture risk years in advance.
And you mentioned physical models.
Yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Researchers are using 3D printing and silicone molding to create physically accurate, flexible silicone rubber replicas of a patient's specific aneurysm.
So they have a squishy model of my aorta on a lab bench.
Exactly. And they can put it in a flow loop and pump artificial blood through it to physically test where the stress points are, or even practice deploying a stent inside the model before they ever touch the patient. It's rehearsing the surgery and the physics.
It seems like we are moving so far away from one-size-fits-all medicine to this incredibly personalized approach.
That is the trend across all of medicine, but it is especially critical here because every aneurysm is unique. Its shape, its wall thickness, its calcification. Treating it as a unique engineering problem is the only way we're going to get better outcomes and move beyond just using a ruler.
So let's bring this all home. We've covered a lot of ground today. The silent expansion, the smoking risk, the genetic link, the terrifying rupture stats, and the high-tech future.
It is a lot to take in, for sure.
If there is one single takeaway for the listener, maybe for someone who is listening and thinking, hey, I kind of fit that demographic profile, what is it?
If you are a man over 65, and especially if you have ever smoked or if you have a brother or father who had this, do not wait for the guidelines to catch up to you. Be your own advocate. Ask your doctor about a screening ultrasound.
Let's ask the question.
Just ask the question. It is painless, it is quick, it's not expensive, and it is the only way to know.
It's the difference between a silent risk and a managed condition.
Exactly. Knowledge is safety here. You can't fix what you don't know you have.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought, something to mull over. We talked about Einstein refusing surgery to die elegantly, accepting his fate. But we also just talked about the future of personalized biomechanics and digital twins.
Yes.
It strikes me that we are in this fascinating transition period in human history. We are moving from a world of acceptance of fate like Einstein to a world where we might be able to engineer our way out of our own mortality, or at least this form of it. If we can model the stress on every vessel wall and reinforce it before it ever fails, are we approaching a point where mechanical failure of the human body becomes optional?
That is a profound question. If we can maintain the machine indefinitely, does the definition of dying of natural causes just disappear?
Yeah.
Do we all just become vintage cars that need constant upkeep?
Something to think about next time you feel your own pulse. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It was a pleasure. Stay curious and stay healthy.
See you next time.